some mods provide us with more units or visual overhauls, giving our games new life even years after release. But sometimes, we get mods that completely change the entire experience by revamping time periods and important mechanics, creating a completely different experience than what the game originally intended to make. The Great War for Napoleon Total War is such a mod. A total overhaul that takes us an entire century forward into the time of the First World War. This mod is in reality an unbelievable 10 years in the making, having released the very first version all the way back in 2013. And now, after all this time, you and I are taking an extensive look at the long-awaited 6.0 version, going through the mod itself and looking at the new major improvements. And if that sounds good to you, I hope you leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. It would really help me out and allow me to continue making more videos just like this one and others. And now, the Great War. In 1805, when the original Napoleon Total War is set, Europe was divided into kingdoms, empires, and duchies, and it remained a relatively fragmented continent. Before Napoleon swept across from France to Russia, the Holy Roman Empire was still a thing, and Italy was still over half a century away from being unified. Fast forward to 1914 and the setting of the Great War, and we're looking at a completely different landscape. Germany is now the undisputed power in Central Europe, and Italy has become one. Austria controls a vast dominion, and Russia is in command of the East. In the north, Norway enjoys its first decade of independence in centuries, and together with its Scandinavian neighbors, is content not being a part of the ongoing war in Europe. The Europe of 1914 is a Europe of empires, of truly globe-spanning empires, and one of rapidly improving technological innovation. And even though the powers that be advertised this war to end all wars as being over before Christmas of the same year, all of these factors ensured that there was no way the nationalistic and imperial empires would call it quits before they were forced to. From the get-go, it's obvious just how much has changed here. From the time-appropriate flags flying across the continent, to the navy models covering the oceans, the brand new army models littering the land, and even the spy models, now turned to little airplanes, are gorgeous and immersive, even though I laugh when it becomes clear that not everything can be modded away due to engine limitations. But there's so much more here. Every part of the UI has been remade, from the sandbags and steel backgrounds to the historically accurate leader portraits of every king and emperor. Every character even comes with appropriate traits, making them even more personal, and I love the dedication here. The unit cards are excellently made in the style of the original game, but now with updated artwork. On the campaign side of things, all of these aspects make playing every single faction a unique experience, especially when you take the political situation into account. For example, Germany's army is massive, and even though most of them are located in the west, the cities of eastern Prussia are heavily fortified in anticipation of Russian armies. Likewise, its navy is up and coming, but capable of victory in smaller skirmishes. The British are different, its navy larger, but with fewer armies. France also sports large forces, most naturally amassed on its eastern front, but clever tactics and strategy are required to stop the German advance. Of course, the Italians, Austrians, and Russians are also here. Even the Ottomans will be potential major players in the war, but it all depends on how you choose to go forward. Each army has now been placed in their historically appropriate positions for that extra immersion. The game begins with the major event setting everything in motion, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Several events like this occur throughout the game. Due to Napoleon's engine and game design, the events are mostly flavor text with historical facts and occurrences, but they do a lot to bring us into the era and all of the innovations and political events taking place around the world. But more than that, you'll get to make a major choice at the start, reminiscent of Hearts of Iron actually, where you get to decide whether you want the factions of the Great War to remain true to history, having the major alliances stay intact and severely limiting diplomatic possibilities in the process. The alternative is having a more open experience. It will still be 1914 and you'll have a form of the war happening, but you're free to experiment and have other factions go their own way. And if you wish to negotiate, there's even added flavor to the diplomacy options. So instead of presenting state gifts, you can now provide food, medical supplies, and munitions. And on that note, even the trade resources have changed to ones that are more needed for an industrial war. And obviously, naval empires like the British and the French are more likely to take advantage of these. But there's more. Underneath the hood, we have all the new technologies that fit the time period, and they're more than just normal tech upgrades. Here, the innovations are divided into aspects of society like politics and industry, and we can research ideologies like nationalism and Marxism. There's actually quite a lot here, but since you're basically in an all-out war situation from the start, it becomes extra hard to prioritize, having you choose between ideologies that improve public order or new technological innovations that will put new weapons on the battlefield. With the latest update, there's so much attention given to making everything from government types and religions to economies and demographics to be as accurate as possible. Even the workers have been turned to the proletariat, and the upper classes are now the bourgeois. And if that's not 1914 vibes, then I don't know what is. Taking all of this to the battlefield is arguably even more impressive. The battlefields feel even more massive and two-sided than ever. The unit sizes are massive, and reload times have been massively decreased, giving us a battlefield where there's no end to the firing. This is perhaps the most evident when a rogue cavalry unit attempts a charge head-on. You could perhaps have gotten away with this in vanilla, but now, there's no way to get out of this alive. Cavalry is still effective when charging from the flanks, but just be careful is all I'm saying. This alone constitutes a massive change to the flow of battle, and I love how we now hear whistleblowers when moving our troops forward instead of the flute players from Napoleon. But the biggest change has to be how artillery works. First of all, they look amazing, being uniquely detailed and having that great industrial World War I look. They also sound fantastic and have the ability to completely shred through enemy units in one and the same barrage. As the years go by, the technology does as well, and your innovations on the campaign translate directly to the battlefield, with units getting better and receiving even more destructive weapons, and the artillery being able to do even more damage per shot. And the most awesome of these innovations has to be the introduction of the tank, which constitutes a massively destructive force on the battlefield. These changes completely change the dynamic, and where vanilla Napoleon battles don't necessarily change that much over time, the battles in the Great War changed drastically from the beginning of the war to the end. Whether you're the attacker moving forward, whistles blowing among the smoke and shrapnel, or as a defender, digging in as your artillery shreds the enemy to pieces. Due to engine limitations, naval battles are by necessity not as fleshed out as the army ones, but we still have gameplay changes. The ships are admittedly painted differently and have some cool new models attached to them, but more than that, reload times are changed and cannon power is increased. The naval battles do remain cool, and even though it looks a bit weird with invisible masts, a fix to remove the sails altogether is being worked on. The Great War has been a long time in the making, but has everything to show for it. A masterclass example of what modders are able to do with Total War, we're taking 100 years into the future, from a battlefield of muskets and maneuvers to industrial weaponry and mass casualties. On the campaign side of things, nearly everything is changed, from leader portraits to technologies, and we even have historically placed armies, allowing us to immerse ourselves into the time period. The army and navy models make it all complete, and adds that sense of continuity when leaving for the battlefield. Here, the artillery, unit sizes and sounds are bigger and more destructive, and the transition from early war battles to the later stages feel natural and epic once you're there. If you're a fan of the First World War, and looking for the only true and immersive representation of that era in the entire Total War series, then the Great War is your only option, and for good reason. The dedication put into this mod is impressive to say the least, and the modders have truly taken the Napoleon engine to its limits. I highly recommend checking out the Great War 6.0, but I can't promise you'll have finished your game by Christmas. Thank you so much for watching. Have you played the Great War before? And if so, how long have you been waiting for this update? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, I hope you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.